Now we will be discussing a very important physiological system of our body called excretory system. In this system, we will be discussing its functions and structures of the kidney and other related structures. As you all know that our body is composed of trillions of cells. These cells join to form different tissues. Different tissues form different organs. Organs form organ systems, and organ systems finally make our body. All the cells of our body function for the survival of the body. In turn, the body works for the maintenance and survival of the cells. Now, all the cells of our body perform many different functions. For example, our muscle cells contract to cause the movement in our limbs, in our body. Muscle cells of the heart contract to make our heart pump continuously. Similarly, our nerve cells perform the function of conduction of impulses from brain to different parts of the body. In brief, our cells perform so many different functions. Now, when the cells perform function, they need energy for it. Energy is required for almost every function of our body. In fact, no work can take place without energy. Similarly, in our body, energy is required for our cells for performing different functions. Now, where from we get this energy? Energy is derived from the food that we eat. Food, whether it comes from the plant sources or the animal source. For example, milk, vegetables, fruits, egg, meat, etc. This food we ingest through our digestive system, wherein it is acted upon by different types of secretions and enzymes which cause digestion of this food. After the food is digested, it reaches through blood to our cells. Besides the food, we also need oxygen. Oxygen reaches to our body through our lungs. We breathe the air in, which contains oxygen, and this oxygen reaches through the blood from lungs to our cells. Thus, our cells receive food or nutrients and oxygen. Now, our cells use this food and oxygen to create energy, to derive energy for performing different functions. I can show it here on the board that energy is required for different functions. This comes from food and oxygen. The process by which our cells derive energy is called metabolism. Or we can say, when our cells use oxygen and food to derive energy, this process is called metabolism. So, by the process of metabolism, our cells derive energy, and this energy is used to perform different functions of the cell and body as a whole. During this process of metabolism, while cells are using food and oxygen, many products are produced that are not wanted by our body, or they are not useful for our body, or they may be toxic to our body. So, during the process of metabolism, various unwanted substances are created. Besides the unwanted substances, also carbon dioxide is produced in our body. Carbon dioxide is essential for our body, but to a limit. If it exceeds, it may lead to disturbance of the normal balance of the body. Carbon dioxide, if retained in our tissues and in the body, it can decrease the pH of our body fluids, or we can say it will make our body fluids more acidic. Similarly, many different substances like ammonia, which is created as a result of metabolism, is also harmful for our body tissues, especially brain. So these different unwanted substances or toxic substances which accumulate in our body during the process of metabolism need to be removed from the body. In addition to these wastes of metabolism and carbon dioxide, many different harmful substances reach to our body like drugs, toxins and other heavy metals. So these drugs, toxins and heavy metals, along with the unwanted substances created from the metabolism, they need to be removed from the body. It's very important that these wastes does not accumulate in our body. Actually, our body, or we can say the cells in our body, which are about 100 trillion in number, they are bathed in a limited body fluid. That fluid which is in our body is approximately about 32 liters. Now imagine 100 trillion cells dipped in 32 liters of fluid, and all these cells producing a lot of waste products. So what will happen, that this fluid in which our cells remain healthy, by accumulation of toxic substances may die. So in our body there is a system wherefrom the unwanted substances are quickly removed from the body, and whatever is depleted from the body is replenished. If water becomes less in our body, we take water through mouth. If nutrients decrease in this body fluid, we take food to fulfill that need. Similarly, if waste accumulate in this fluid, these need to be removed because the fluid in which the cells remain is limited. So it has to be kept clean and at a normal balance. That is called homeostasis. So homeostasis basically is maintenance of the internal environment of the body or the internal environment of the cells. As long as this fluid in which the cells remains at a normal level in respect to different constituents, the cells will remain healthy and our body will maintain health. So in regard of excretion, excretory system, these unwanted substances need to be removed from the body, and in fact they are removed by the process of excretion. So we may say the process by which the unwanted substances are eliminated from the body is called excretion. Now, after understanding what is excretion, what is the process of excretion, that is removal of unwanted substances from the body, now we will discuss different organs or systems that are involved in this process of excretion. Well, in case of excretion, there is not a single system of our body that's involved. In fact, many different systems of the body are involved in this process of excretion, or we can say in the process of removal of unwanted substances from the body. First system that's involved in excretion is the digestive system. Digestive system, as you know, consists of a long tube extending from mouth to anus, and digestive system includes mouth, esophagus, stomach, intestines, small and large, etc. So digestive system helps us in excreting the undigested food. When we take food, not all parts of the food are useful for our body. There are certain substances and materials in our food that our body does not require, or they are not digested in our system. So after the process of digestion, many residual or undigested food is left in our gastrointestinal tract. So here, this residual matter in the form of feces is excreted by the digestive system. So this is also a process of excretion. We can say digestive system excretes the unwanted food in the form of feces. Second organ that's involved in the process of excretion are the lungs. Lungs, as you know, basically perform the function of supplying our body with oxygen. Our body, our cells, as I mentioned earlier, require oxygen for metabolism, for deriving energy. This oxygen reaches to our body through the lungs. So the primary function of the lungs is to supply us with the oxygen. But along with supplying the oxygen, it also performs an excretory function. It excretes the carbon dioxide from the body. When we breathe out, the carbon dioxide in our body that is accumulated as a result of metabolism is expelled to the outside. So in this way, lungs also perform a function of excretion by removing carbon dioxide from the body. Next very important organ of excretion is skin. Skin, as you know, covers our body. It performs many other functions, like it protects us from the external hazards like mechanical injuries. It protects our internal organs from the toxins that may reach our body from the environment. It protects our body from various chemicals that are dissolved in water and may reach to our body. So skin is basically a protective organ. Besides protection, it also gives us the sense of touch. It's through the skin that we perceive the sense of touch, pain, or pressure. Besides these important functions of protection and touch, skin also is involved in the process of excretion. Our skin excretes water, salts, and many different wastes. Now the next organ that's also involved in this process of excretion is liver. Liver is basically a largest gland of our body. It's also an accessory gland of the digestive system. It performs many functions like metabolic functions. It also produces a secretion called bile. Bile is a secretion produced by liver that is very important for the digestion of the fats. The fats that we take in our food or that is contained in our food cannot be digested unless it is acted upon by the bile secreted by the liver. However, liver in this bile also secrete various unwanted substances. For example, bile pigments, heavy metals, drugs, and toxins. Bile pigments basically are the end products of the hemoglobin metabolism. If you might be knowing that our blood contains special cells called RBCs. These RBCs contain a pigment called hemoglobin. These cells have a lifespan of 120 days. After 120 days in circulation, these RBCs finally in the spleen are destroyed. The hemoglobin inside these cells is degraded, and the end product that is left of this hemoglobin are the bile pigments. So, liver, along with the bile, which is important for the digestion of fats, also excretes these bile pigments. Similarly, heavy metals may reach to our body through water or through the food chain. These heavy metals, if accumulate in our body, may lead to several diseases. The liver also excretes these heavy metals through bile. Similarly, many toxins or the drugs that we take intentionally for treatment of some diseases or unintentionally, if accumulate in body, may prove to be toxic. So liver here plays a very important excretory function by excreting all these substances like bile pigments, heavy metals, drugs, toxins through bile. Another important organ system which is involved in the process of excretion is the renal system. Now, so far we have discussed many different organ systems or organs that are involved in the process of excretion. First, we discussed digestive system that excretes unwanted food substances, lungs that excrete carbon dioxide, skin excretes water, salts and different wastes, liver excretes bile pigments, heavy metals, drugs and toxins. And now we will be discussing renal system. Actually, renal system is one of the major excretory systems of the body. The organs and the organ systems that we discussed earlier with regard to the excretion, their excretory capacity is limited. And among these, renal systems has the highest excretory capacity. In fact, it's the major excretory system of our body. The main work of excretion is in fact done by the renal system. So what renal system does, it produces urine, and it's through this urine that renal system excretes many waste products of the body. So in short, we can say that renal system is a major excretory system, and in further discussion we will be discussing this renal system in excretory functions. Now first let us analyze and discuss what are the different organs that comprise renal system. In renal system we have a pair of kidneys, a pair of ureters, a urinary bladder and a urethra. In this diagram you can see we have a pair of kidneys. From these kidneys comes the ureters. These ureters open into a bag-like structure called urinary bladder, and this urinary bladder then gives way to urethra. Urine, which I said earlier, is through which the kidneys excrete different wastes from the body. Urine is produced here in these kidneys, and after production of urine, urine passes through these ureters into the urinary bladder where it is stored. And whenever it is feasible for us, or whenever this bladder gets full, urine is voided through this urethra. So this is the basic structure, basic organs that are involved in the renal system. So we have a pair of kidneys. Each kidney has one ureter. So we have two ureters. These join in a urinary bladder which stores urine until it is voided, and then the urine is voided through the urethra to the outside. Now, if we see what is inside the kidneys, we will first be discussing its gross structure, and then later we will discuss its microscopic structure. Kidneys are basically bean-shaped structures. Bean, you must have seen that this is the shape of a bean. So kidneys are bean-shaped structures, and each kidney is covered by a connective tissue capsule. That is, each kidney has a covering outside, which is a connective tissue covering, that's called capsule. This capsule gives protection and support to the kidneys. On the medial side of the kidney is a small depression. Here you can see this is called as hilum. Sorry. If we see our body, usually in anatomy we have different sides. If any organ is facing to the front, it is called anterior, and the organs facing the back are called posterior. The sides facing towards the outside of the body on the left or right is called the lateral surface, and the side facing inside the body is called the medial side. Here in this kidneys you can see this side is called the medial side because this is facing to the inner of the body. So on the medial side of the body there is a depression in each kidney called hilum. The blood vessels and the ureter passes through this hilum. You can see here ureters pass through the hilum. Also the blood vessels, that is artery and vein, they also enter the kidneys at this spot. Now kidneys can be divided into different regions. It has an outer region called cortex. Inner to the cortex is medulla, and then is the renal sinus. Renal sinus can further be divided into renal pelvis and calyces. So these are three different zones. If we cut a kidney, we can see inside these three different regions: renal outer cortex, inner medulla, and renal sinus. Here in this diagram you can see outer cortex, then medulla, then renal, pelvis, and calyces. Now let us discuss the microscopic structure of the kidney. Basically, kidneys are made up of a special structure called nephron. Nephron is considered as a structural as well as functional unit of the kidney, which means the function that is performed by kidneys is basically performed by this structure called nephron. Like in nervous system, neuron is the structural and functional unit. In muscles, muscle fiber is the structural and functional unit. Similarly, in kidneys, nephron is the structural and functional unit. So the functions that a kidney performs is basically due to the functions that a nephron performs. Each kidney has approximately 1 million nephrons. So in both the kidneys we will be having 2 million nephrons. So all these nephrons collectively perform the function of the kidneys. So as we have said earlier, the function of kidney is to produce urine. So in fact the urine is produced in these millions of nephrons, and from all these nephrons small quantities of urine that they each form are finally collected through the calyces into the renal pelvis, where from it goes through the ureters into the bladder and to the outside through urethra. Now, a nephron has following parts. First, glomerulus, which is basically a tuft of capillaries, small capillaries. It's basically like this, small capillary tuft. They are coiled. A Bowman's capsule, which is a cup-shaped structure. Then a tubular part. The tubular part is just after the Bowman's capsule is coiled, and this portion is called proximal convoluted tubule. Following convoluted tubule, there is a loop called loop of Henle, and then there is another portion of this tubular structure which is also coiled called distal convoluted tubule. This distal convoluted tubule finally joins the collecting ducts. Here, this is the glomerulus. These are basically small capillaries taking the blood into this coiled portion, and here blood goes out. This is a cup-shaped structure called Bowman's capsule. From here, a tubular structure starts. First coiled portion is called distal convoluted tubule. Then there is a loop called loop of Henle. Then there is another coiled portion called distal convoluted tubule, and this tubule finally joins the collecting ducts. So this is the basic structure of the nephron. Now, this urinary system, which comprises of kidneys, is the major excretory organ, and the functions of excretion are performed by formation of urine. Kidneys form urine, and in this urine, kidneys excrete the unwanted substances, wastes and toxins to the outside. Now, we will be discussing how the kidneys form this urine, or we can say process of urine formation. Our body produces daily about 1 to 1.5 liters of urine, and it's through this urine that kidneys excrete the unwanted substances or the wastes from the body. The process of this urine formation can be divided into 3 steps or 3 sub-processes. But if we try to understand in a very simple fashion how the urine is formed, what actually happens that the blood enters the kidneys where it is filtered, and what are the waste products that are excreted in the urine, and what is useful is retained in the body. Here I can explain to you in a very simple fashion. If we consider this as kidneys, blood enters through it into the kidneys. Now this blood contains wastes as well as certain substances that are very essential for the body. So blood basically contains wastes as well as things that are very essential for the body. This blood, when goes into the kidneys, here it is filtered. So all the blood is filtered here in the kidneys, and then what kidneys do, they reabsorb back the things that are useful, and whatever is not useful is left outside in the form of urine. So this is a simple way of understanding how kidneys produce urine. Now we will discuss these steps one by one. In urine formation, the first and foremost step is filtration. This is also called as ultrafiltration or tubular filtration. When blood passes through the glomerulus, which I told earlier is basically small capillaries, and these capillaries have small pores like a filter, like a sieve. And when blood passes through this glomerulus, the plasma is filtered into the Bowman's capsule. Now plasma is basically the liquid portion of the blood. Our blood is constituted of two parts. One is the solid part, which contains cells like RBCs, WBCs and platelets. This is the solid part of the blood. Now also our blood contains the liquid part, and that liquid part is called as plasma. This plasma also contains proteins called plasma proteins. Now when the blood passes in through the glomerulus, this is the Bowman's capsule, and here blood enters into the glomerulus, which is like a tuft of capillaries. Now these glomerular capillaries have small pores. When blood enters into this, through these small pores, the plasma is filtered into the Bowman's capsule. Now, because in blood the size of these cells is too big to pass through the pores of the glomerulus, so what will happen, that cells will continue to go into the capillaries. However, the liquid part, that is plasma, will filter into the Bowman's capsule. But the plasma proteins inside the plasma are also not filtered into this Bowman's capsule, because the size of these plasma proteins is also very large. So finally what is filtered into the Bowman's capsule is basically the plasma portion of the blood minus the plasma proteins. Now this plasma minus plasma proteins that collects into this Bowman's capsule is called filtrate. This filtrate, which comes from the blood, contains both essential as well as unwanted substances found in our body. For example, it contains glucose, which is very important for us. It contains many different amino acids which are very essential to our body, but it also contains some unwanted substances like urea, which is toxic for our body, and many different wastes. So what is collected here in this Bowman's capsule is both a combination of wanted and unwanted substances, or essential or waste products. So this is the first step of urine formation, where blood goes into the glomerulus, where except for the cells and plasma protein, rest of the whole of blood is filtered into the Bowman's capsule. Now our kidneys, which filter this blood and form this filtrate, it has a particular rate, and this rate is called glomerular filtration rate, or we can say the rate at which the filtrate in both the kidneys is formed is called glomerular filtration rate. This glomerular filtration rate varies with different conditions in our body. Normally, the normal glomerular filtration rate, or GFR, is about 125 milliliters per minute, or we can say 180 liters per day. Here you can see that 180 liters per day is a very big volume. Our blood, as I told earlier, which is consisted of cells and plasma, it contains about 3 liters of plasma. That is the liquid part. And glomerular filtration rate is about 180 liters. That means our blood passes about 50 times through the kidneys, or it is filtered 50 times in a day in the kidneys for filtration. So this is how our kidneys are very important for the excretory functions. Our blood, which alters from minute to minute in terms of wastes and useful products, goes through the kidneys about 50 times. In this way, a very precise balance is maintained in the constituents of our blood. Now this glomerular filtration rate, which is about 180 liters per day, is variable. Certain conditions can vary this filtration rate. Among them, the sympathetic stimulation, which is very essential for you people, has a very important effect on this glomerular filtration rate. Sympathetic stimulation, as you may be knowing, happens in our body during exercise. So whenever we start exercise, there is the sympathetic stimulation. Sympathetic basically is one of the divisions of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system, as you might be knowing, is that part of the nervous system that controls the internal organs of the body, that controls and regulates the functions of our viscera. So this autonomic nervous system has two divisions or two parts. One is parasympathetic, another is sympathetic. So here we are discussing sympathetic stimulation. So whenever this part of this autonomic nervous system is stimulated, this has an effect on glomerular filtration rate in kidneys. Normally, mild or moderate stimulation of this system usually has no effect on glomerular filtration rate. However, during very strenuous exercise, during very heavy exercise, there is a strong stimulation of this sympathetic system. So what happens during the stimulation of this sympathetic system, because sympathetic system, its effect is to cause the constriction of the arteries and the arterioles. So what happens in this sympathetic stimulation, that the arteries or arterioles, small capillaries that enter into the glomerulus and that go out of the glomerulus are constricted. But the effect is more pronounced on those capillaries that go out of this glomerulus. These outgoing capillaries are called as efferent arterioles, and the arterioles that take blood into the glomerulus are called as afferent arterioles. So the sympathetic stimulation, especially the strong sympathetic stimulation, has the pronounced effect on the efferent arterioles, means those arterioles from which the blood is coming out of the glomerulus. Now constriction of this efferent arteriole initially increases the GFR, because GFR depends on the pressure inside the capillaries, in the glomerular capillaries. If the pressure is high, there will be more filtration, so the GFR will be higher. By the constriction of these arterioles under sympathetic stimulation, what happens, the pressure initially increases in these capillaries, and which in turn increases the glomerular filtration rate. However, after some time, due to the accumulation of the blood in the glomerulus, there is a backward pressure on the afferent arterioles. That means now the little amount of blood is entering into the glomerulus, which then decreases the GFR. So we must say that sympathetic stimulation, mild and moderate, has usually no effect on GFR. However, strong stimulation of the sympathetic system has a mixed effect on GFR. Initially it increases the GFR, and later on it decreases the GFR. However, if this stimulation is continued, for example up to 30 minutes, the GFR returns to the normal. This is because the neurotransmitters that are secreted by the sympathetic system, they are removed from the body and their concentration decreases. So after the prolonged stimulation of the sympathetic system, the GFR returns to the normal. Now the second step in urine formation is tubular reabsorption. First step we studied was the filtration, where whole of the blood except for the cells and plasma proteins is filtered into the Bowman's capsule. This process is called filtration. That means this filtrate contains both the useful as well as the unwanted substances. Now the second step is tubular reabsorption. As I mentioned earlier, that a nephron, which is the structural and functional unit of the kidney, has a glomerulus, a Bowman's capsule, and a tubular portion. Reabsorption means taking the substances back into the blood. Now this tubular portion, which consists of different regions, as I mentioned earlier, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, and distal convoluted tubule. In this tubular portion, now the reabsorption takes place. Now the filtrate here in this Bowman's capsule, which contains both useful and unwanted substances, when passes into this tubule, the substances that are useful for our body, like glucose and amino acid, are reabsorbed back into the blood. In this way, the substances that are left inside this tube is water plus wastes. So this is what is finally called urine. So this is a very efficient way in which kidneys excrete the waste matters along with water from the body. First step is filtration, where the whole of the blood except for the cells and plasma protein is filtered into this Bowman's capsule. Now this is filtered at a specific rate called GFR. This filtrate contains both useful as unwanted substances. While passing through the tubules, this filtrate, the important substances, the essential substances, are reabsorbed back. This process is called tubular reabsorption, and the water and the waste are left inside this tubule, which later form the urine. Now this process of reabsorption or taking back of the useful substances is a selective process. Selective means that not all substances found in this tube are reabsorbed back into this blood. As I said, only the useful substances are reabsorbed back. This means that this process of tubular reabsorption is selective. Selective, it only reabsorbs what is wanted and do not reabsorb what is unwanted. Now this process of reabsorption takes place by two processes. One is passive reabsorption, and the another is active reabsorption. Now to understand reabsorption, we will imagine a simple membrane across which different substances will cross. For example, if a substance present here on this side of this membrane and the same substance is present on the other side of the membrane. Under normal conditions, what will happen that the side on which the concentration of the substance is higher, these molecules will move to the side where the concentration is lower. This is called as diffusion. Diffusion means the exchange of substances from higher concentration to lower concentration. Similarly, in passive reabsorption, what happens that the substances move along the electrochemical gradient. Here, no energy is required. They move automatically without the use of any energy from higher side to lower side. This is called as passive reabsorption. However, in active reabsorption, energy is required, because here the transport of substances across the membrane is against the electrochemical gradient. For example, what happens in active reabsorption, the concentration of substances on the side where it is lower and the side where it is higher, the transport takes place against the concentration gradient. That means from the place where the concentration is lower to the side where the concentration is higher. So here the transport is against the electrochemical gradient. This requires energy, and energy is derived from the ATP. So this type of transport or reabsorption will be called as active absorption. So in nutshell, the reabsorption in the tubules is of two types: active reabsorption and passive reabsorption. Active reabsorption means where energy is required because the substances are to be transported against the electrochemical gradient. In passive absorption, because the transport takes place along the electrochemical gradient, that's from higher to lower, so no energy is required. Now, what are the different substances that take place, whose transport take place by active reabsorption? These are sodium, potassium, calcium, phosphates, glucose and amino acids. All these substances are reabsorbed by the active reabsorption. There are certain other substances that are reabsorbed by passive reabsorption. These are chlorides, urea and water. Now, what are the sites of reabsorption? As I mentioned earlier, that the reabsorption takes place in the tubular portion of the nephron, which consists of proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle and distal convoluted tubule. Different substances are reabsorbed in different portions of this tubule. In proximal convoluted tubule, maximum substances are reabsorbed. In fact, 88% of the filtrate is reabsorbed in proximal convoluted tubule. The substances that are reabsorbed are glucose, amino acids, sodium, potassium, calcium and water. So these are substances that are almost mostly reabsorbed in the first portion of the tubular portion, that is proximal convoluted tubule. The another portion of the tubule is the loop of Henle. In the loop of Henle, mainly sodium and chloride is reabsorbed. The last portion of the nephron, the tubular portion of nephron, which is called as distal convoluted tubule, here different substances are also reabsorbed. For example, sodium, calcium and water. Now we can see that in different portions of the tubule, different substances are reabsorbed. Most of the reabsorption takes place in proximal convoluted tubule. Glucose and amino acid is reabsorbed completely in the proximal convoluted tubule. However, certain other substances, for example water, it's reabsorbed both in PCT and DCT, that is proximal convoluted tubule and distal convoluted tubule. Sodium is reabsorbed from both from all the portions, that is PCT, loop of Henle and distal convoluted tubule. Now let us take two important substances, water and sodium, and if we analyze, if we see that sodium is reabsorbed from the all portions of the tubular portion of nephron, that is it's reabsorbed from the PCT, it's also reabsorbed from the loop of Henle, it's also reabsorbed from the distal convoluted tubule. Now there is a little bit of difference in the reabsorption from PCT and DCT. Sodium in the proximal convoluted tubule is reabsorbed by active transport in PCT. It's also reabsorbed in the DCT by active reabsorption. However, in the distal convoluted tubule, this reabsorption is under the effect of the hormone aldosterone. Here, a hormone called aldosterone, which is released by our adrenal glands, the cortical portion of adrenal glands, this hormone affects the reabsorption of sodium from DCT. So we can say that the reabsorption of sodium, which takes place in both PCT and DCT, however in DCT, is under the influence of the hormone aldosterone, which is secreted by the gland called the endocrine gland. Endocrine gland are basically two small glands which are located on the poles of our kidneys. On the both poles of our kidneys, we have two small glands called the adrenal glands, and these are the part of endocrine system. These glands produce many different hormones, and one of the important hormones that is secreted from the cortical portion of this gland is aldosterone, which is basically a mineralocorticoid. Mineralocorticoids are those hormones that influence especially the reabsorption of minerals, especially sodium and potassium. Another substance which is very important for reabsorption is water. Water, you can see, is reabsorbed both from PCT and DCT. However, water is not reabsorbed in the loop of Henle, because loop of Henle is impermeable to water. Only water can be reabsorbed from the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule. Here the difference again is that in the PCT, water is absorbed by passive reabsorption, and in DCT, the absorption of water is under the influence of a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. This hormone, antidiuretic hormone, is released from a small gland located at the base of our brain called pituitary gland. This pituitary gland has two portions. One is called anterior pituitary or adenohypophysis. Another portion of this gland is called posterior pituitary or neurohypophysis. This hormone, antidiuretic hormone, is released from the posterior pituitary or neurohypophysis. The effect of this hormone, antidiuretic, as the name suggests, is that it reduces the amount of urine, which means it reabsorbs more water from the urine into the blood. That is how it performs the function of antidiuresis, and that's why its name antidiuretic hormone. This hormone increases the reabsorption of water from the distal convoluted tubule. Basically, the cells that line the tubule at the DCT have the receptors for this hormone ADH. Now, after the two steps which we discussed in the formation of urine, first was the filtration, where the plasma, except for the cells and plasma protein, was filtered into the Bowman's capsule. This filtrate contained both useful and unwanted substances. Then this filtrate, when passes through the tubule, substances that are useful are reabsorbed back. This reabsorption, as I said, is selective. That means only the useful substances are reabsorbed. Second, the process of reabsorption may be active or passive, and reabsorption of the substances takes place at different sites. Water is reabsorbed at both the proximal and the distal tubule, sodium at proximal, distal, as well as at the loop of the Henle, glucose and amino acid mostly in the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, what is left in this tubule will later form the urine. This filtrate, which is now in the tubules, contains water and unwanted substances, because all the useful substances have been reabsorbed back. Now, another process that takes place in the final formation of urine is called as tubular secretion. Tubular secretion means that certain substances are directly secreted into this to be formed urine, into these tubules. Apart from the excretion of waste from here, that is from blood through this filtrate into the tubules, certain substances are directly secreted into this tubule by the kidneys. This is called tubular secretion, or sometimes it's also called as tubular excretion, because here certain substances enter into this tubule. Now the substances that are excreted in this tubule, one of the important substance is hydrogen ion. Now after these steps, three processes, that is filtration, reabsorption and tubular secretion, finally the urine is formed. Now this urine contains water and unwanted substances. From the kidneys, this urine goes through the ureters into the bladder, and where it is stored and later voided to the outside through the urethra. So in this process of excretion, we studied first what is excretion. Second, we discussed what are the different organs of excretion. For example, digestive system, lungs, liver, but the major excretory system is the renal system. So we discussed renal system in detail, in which we first studied what are the different organs of the renal system. Renal system contains kidneys, ureters, bladder and urethra. Then we discussed how kidneys excrete substances to the outside. Kidneys excrete it through the formation of urine. Later we discussed how the urine is formed. Urine is formed by three different steps. First step is the filtration, where whole of the blood is filtered into the Bowman's capsule out of the blood, except for the RBCs and plasma membrane. Then from this filtrate, useful substances are reabsorbed back, and this step of urine formation is called tubular reabsorption. Then certain substances are directly excreted into this urine through the kidneys, which is called as tubular secretion. And finally the urine is formed, that is voided outside. In this way our blood is filtered in the kidneys and waste products are voided to the outside. As I said earlier, that the amount of fluid that is filtered into the kidneys daily is about 180 liters. That means our blood is filtered about 50 times a day. So in this way a very fine balance is maintained in the constituents of the blood.